Welcome to another episode of Mysteries Unknown. I've got a great episode for you tonight. I've got Marcus with me, and Marcus is going to talk about an encounter he had when he was a teenager in the state of New Mexico. He was out with a friend one night and had a creature scream at him, kind of describe the scream like a woman. A lot of other things happened, and then he's going to get into an encounter that his mom had, but what makes this encounter really strange is it's really similar to his encounter. We're going to get into all that. Before I do, I just want to say thanks for being here, hanging out with me tonight. I couldn't do this podcast without you. If you've got an encounter that you would like to send me, you can always send it to me by email at mysteriesunknownpodcast@gmail.com. Let's jump right in the story. Marcus, welcome to the show.
Hey, pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Man, I'm honored to have you here, especially, you being an LEO and especially just being a fan of the show. When you reached out to me, sent me that email, I knew I had to have you on the show, so I'm very excited to have you here. But why don't you take us back to your encounter and just kind of walk us through that?
Okay, so my experience takes place in the summer of 2015. I was just out of high school, and I think I had just got my first house. So I lived in a place in South Central New Mexico that is right directly alongside the Rio Grande River, which is the biggest river in the Southwest region where I'm at, right? So all the towns in New Mexico are kind of built alongside the Rio Grande. So you're never going to be far away from it, right? So rewinding the clock back to 2015, in that time in my life, I just experienced like my first breakup or whatever. It was nothing. So I had a friend over at the time who was a really dear friend to me. And this friend was just helping me through, keep my mind occupied. Like, hey man, let's go do this. Let's go do that. This kind of thing. So this friend and we decided one night, and this was a summer night, and I don't think there was any moonlight out. It was hot, and there was nothing to do other than to go drive around and hang out. So that's what we wanted to do. Drove around town for a little while, and then we decided, hey, let's go drive the river, because that's just one of the things that you do. There's many, many roads alongside the river that are almost like secondary roads to the paved roads in that area, right? Like the river connects all the local towns together. If you can't get to it, from the main road, there's always another way to get to it, right? So we just drive the river. You go screw around, have a good time. So her and we decided, hey, let's just go hang out at this one little spot. There's like picnic areas and stuff. So we pull up to one of these picnic areas, and we're like, let's get out and walk around, because we were young, and it's just, I don't know, we didn't really use our brains that much. So we get out and we start walking. We get about maybe 60 yards from my vehicle that we had drove there in. And we're just walking, kind of casually talking with each other as we're walking. We're using our little old cell phones for flashlights. Another thing I should note is in this area, there are walking trails where we were walking at. However, it is in a super dense forest that is called the bosque, and bosque in Spanish means forest, but it's a really dense forested area that runs right alongside the river itself. There's no artificial lighting. All it is just pathways, and that's it. Like, if you go there during the day, you can have a good time. If you go there at night and have no light, you're going to get lost and probably have a bad time. But we went there at night with our phone flashlights like a bunch of geniuses. Anyway, going back into the story, we get about maybe 60 yards from the truck, and we're just walking, having a good time. And then I remember hearing from my distant northeast from where I was at. So it was behind me to my left. I'm walking south. My distant, please correct me if I got my directions backwards. But I'm just walking, and from the far distance, I'm talking way long ways away, I hear it's distant and it's not loud, but it's definitely distinct and noticeable. I hear the sound of a woman screaming at the top of her lungs. So that's what I hear for a good 3 or 4 seconds. And so we're kind of walking, we quiet up, we're listening. And then all of a sudden, as we're walking, that woman screaming, it changes into a chimpanzee, you'll know what I mean when I do it, but my voice doesn't go that high, but like a like how the chimpanzees do. Does that make sense? So it changes from a woman screaming to like a chimpanzee cooing, I guess you could call it. And then it finally ends out with like the sound of a crowing rooster. So that was one call. That all happened within one call. And the whole call itself lasted about 10 seconds or so. So you can imagine you're walking through the dark forest at night and you hear something like that. So my friend and I were like, we stop and we look at each other and we're like, what the heck was that? And I remember I asked her, this is one thing that stuck with me. And like, you being former law enforcement, I'm sure you've been in this like kind of situation before where you look at somebody and you're just like, you look at them and they're just like, yup, So like I asked her, hey, did you hear that? And she says, yup. So it's one of those like moments where you're just like, okay, that's strange. So, us being very young at the time, we figured, it was nothing. Let's keep walking, right? Like, so we continue walking the exact same direction we had already been walking, thinking nothing was wrong at all. We get probably another 15 yards, 20 yards. This time while we're walking, we're being much quieter. We're still talking with each other, but we're just like, not as loud. We're not causing a ruckus, no, nothing like that. And we get about 15, 20 yards away from the previous location where we had heard the sound. And then this time we were stopped dead in our tracks because the exact same call started up again. Only this time it was not a very long way away from me. It was like less than 100 yards away from both of us. And it was more to my left, which would have been my east in that moment. Somewhere in the vicinity. But what I do remember about it, it was loud. It was so loud. It was like one of those things that you hear where you're just like, like you kind of have to like shrink away from because it's kind of piercing to your eardrum. So it was the same call again, a woman screaming at the top of her lungs. And then it changed from that to like a chimpanzee, like kind of cooing, I guess you could call it. I don't know if that's the exact word for that noise, but and then it ended out with like the sound of like a rooster, like not crowing, but like the sound that a rooster makes, all in the same call. So that when that happened, like her and I, we stopped dead in our tracks and it was close, like uncomfortably close. So we looked at each other as the second the call was finished, like we look at each other, we nope our way up on out of there and we decided I would rather live. So I didn't see anything when I left. I didn't see anything that I remember at all. When we got back to the truck and I drove away, we kind of had to double back and then the road drove past that same spot where we would walk to. I didn't see anything at all. So I mean, I was young at the time that happened. I didn't really think much of it. I really didn't. Like it was just a weird thing that happened to me, right? Like I couldn't explain it. I thought maybe at one point, hey, maybe I heard a mountain lion or something, but any research into mountain lions, and then I've been hunting many times through my life, including, I've talked to a lot of people who have been mountain lion hunting, and as it turns out, they sound like mountain lions, but they don't tend to sound like much else, with the exception of the screaming. But if you listen to that specifically, you can tell it's not exactly a woman screaming, like you could tell, but they don't sound like anything other than that. Like their vocal range doesn't quite go that far. So remembering what I heard that night, I'm telling you, it wasn't a mountain lion. And I'm telling you, it wasn't a javelina. It wasn't a feral hog. It was not a coyote. I think it was a Bigfoot. And I think there was actually two of them. I believe that the one off in the further distance, the first call that I heard, was calling out some sort of locating call. I don't know why. And maybe they were traveling together. Maybe they were relation. I don't know. I believe that the second one that I heard that was closer to us maybe didn't know we were there. Maybe they were calling to each other and maybe they were just curious about us, but I do not believe that they knew that we were walking in the direction that we were walking. I believe maybe I heard something that I really wasn't supposed to hear because they didn't know anybody was there. They may have, I may be wrong. That's just the conclusion that I've come to. So that's my encounter. My mom told me about one. After my experience happened, I told her about it years later. She told me about an experience that she had that I thought was very interesting. So this takes place, I believe, in the 2000s, I want to say, maybe '05, somewhere in that range. Maybe just it's just a guesstimation. We lived about approximately 40 miles north of where my experience took place. And again, like I said before, all of the towns in New Mexico, they follow along the Rio Grande. So just imagine going 40 miles north along the exact same river. Um, I was a small child at the time that this took place, along with my two siblings. They were younger than me. We were living in this fantastic home. This home was awesome, man. Like I loved it. I loved every minute of it. It was fun. There was lots of room for us to run around and play. We had a great time while we were there. Um, so my mom told me one night, my dad, he was away at work. He worked very hard for us. But my mom, she stayed home and she raised us. So it was me and my two siblings and my mom. And it was later on in the evening. And interestingly enough, she told me that it was about in summertime when this happened, and it was after me and my two siblings had been put to bed, and then my mother had laid down to go to sleep. And this was a very hot summer, so a lot of the windows inside the house were open because I mean AC systems weren't that great back in the day. Like just something you did, just open the windows, get some airflow through there, and you don't have to cook alive. So, anyways, she's laying down in bed. My mother, she is laying down in bed. Her window is open and her window is directly above her bed where she's asleep. And it's the exact same thing with my siblings and I. Like the window, that's where we sleep. Anyway, she told me that one night she was woken up by the sounds of a loud shriek that came from off in the distance. She told me that it was very loud. It was piercing. It was enough to wake her up when she was falling asleep. So that should tell you like it has, it's noticeable. It's different. Not certainly not the usual sounds that you would hear in that area. Right. So she tells me once that happened, she was woken up and she knew something was like off, something was wrong. But she said that she was very afraid in the moment. And like she stayed there and she waited and she listened. And just a few brief moments after the first shriek called out, another one called out. And it sounded like it was right outside of her window that was open. She said that it was like almost unbearably loud. Um, she said that it was like piercing and it had like it had depth to it. And she remembered in that moment when she heard the second one right outside of the house, she was like kind of frozen, like gripped with fear in that moment because you just heard something that you've probably never heard before and it's right outside of your window. So she told me she heard the two calls and then she heard the sound of loud footsteps coming right outside of her window, like right on the other side of the open window. And shortly, just a brief moment later, she heard the sounds of something heavy running away. So she said that as soon as she heard the noise of it running away, she was kind of able to get her faculties back and she got up and she closed all the windows in the house. And kind of same thing as me, like that was a really weird thing that happened. And then like we move on with our lives, like, interesting. So that was the experience that she told me. And I also have another one if you're really interested in hearing about it. It happened about 15 years before. Well, no, maybe not quite that long, maybe about 10 years before my mother's experience. My grandfather told me a story, and I've heard it all my life. Growing up, I've been out hunting with him. He always made it a big point to take me out, me specifically, out into the woods. We would go camping. He was like he was one of the main folks that taught me how to shoot. The rules of gun safety, all that stuff. I grew up with that. With him, and that's something I treasure even now in life. But just getting back into the story, he told me, and it's the same story I've heard my entire life. He told me that one night he was out camping with his son, who is my uncle, with my grandfather's brother, who is my great uncle, who is now deceased, and then my great uncle's wife. So it was the four of them, and they were out camping at one of the most fantastic places anywhere on planet Earth. And it's called the Mogollon Rim in Arizona. If you've been there, you'll know what I'm talking about. But it's one of those places that you see that you don't question that there's a creator out there. It's just so unbelievably fantastic. What the Mogollon Rim is it's in the Arizona forest. It's on the central eastern side of Arizona, and it's a gigantic cliff in the middle of a forest with the valley that you can see below the cliff goes on for miles and miles in about 180 degrees of direction. And you could just see, and it feels like you can see like forever. It's truly breathtaking and amazing. And my grandfather, he took me there one time, and I'll never forget it. But going back into his story, he told me that he was there out camping, and this took place in the 90s when I was not yet born. My uncle was about 6 or 8 years old, and my grandfather, he was obviously a man, along with his brother and his brother's wife. So they got there to camp like they had done his whole life. They're certainly not first timers. They were well armed enough to put fear into anybody that could have caused them, hate or discontent. So they show up and they do their normal camp thing. You set up, you have a great day, maybe shoot a little bit. You have an awesome campfire at night. And then when it's time for everybody to go to bed, my grandfather had his own tent. My great uncle and his wife had their own tent that was only a short distance away from where the main campsite was. And then my uncle, he slept in my grandfather's truck. So it was the four of them sleeping in 3 different locations, all in the immediate vicinity of the campsite. So he told me that they had all went to bed and everything was totally fine, hunky-dory. Can't wait to wake up for another great day of camping the next day. So, except he was woken up at night by something that he will never forget. He told me at about 3 o'clock in the morning, he was woken up to the sounds of some of the scariest yelling and screaming he had ever heard in his entire life. He told me that he had heard coming from very close distance away at about 3 o'clock in the morning, the sound of something just yelling rah, 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 out in the woods. So he thinks, wow, that's really weird. I guess I'll get my 44 Magnum, throw on my pants, and go out and see what it is, right? Like a normal person. So my grandfather and my great uncle, they both get up, and when they get out of their tents, the campfire is significantly died down. It's just burned into embers. There's no light protruding from it. And he told me that from less than probably 50 yards away from their campsite, the yelling and screaming just continued and continued and continued. But it stayed in one spot. It wasn't moving back and forth. It wasn't circling around their campsite. It was standing in one spot, and it was yelling right at them because they were the only ones in that vicinity. And he said, he demonstrated, I don't have the vocal capacity to demonstrate, but he said, it's just a really deep, groaning yell. and it was yelling specifically at them for being there. My grandfather told me, he said it was territorial. It's he just from the way the growl, or I'm sorry, the way the yell was sounding off, it sounded territorial, and it sounded like, get out of my territory, is what he perceived from when he heard that. So that carried on continuously for about 20 minutes. After about 20 minutes, the yelling and the hollering and all the ruckus that was coming from that specific that specific area, it stopped. So they did the normal thing, and they're like, well, I guess we'll go back to sleep. So they did. So they go back to sleep, and they woke up in the morning, and they went looking for whatever it was, and they went to the area where they heard all the yelling and hollering coming from, and they saw nothing, absolutely nothing. Not a footprint, not a broken tree branch, not a tuft of fur, not a track mark, or anything that would indicate something was there. They found nothing the next day. He told me, and he is still absolutely secure in telling me today, that that was the Mogollon monster that was yelling at him, which is, if you're not familiar, that's like the regional word for Bigfoot in that Arizona region. So like, some places, different places just call it different things. In that region of Arizona, they call it the Mogollon monster. And I think that dates back all the way to the Native American people who lived there before, if I'm not way off the mark on that. But that name's been there for a very long time. So those are 3 personal stories over the course of about 30 years that have happened to my grandfather, my mother, and I. And I didn't see anything that day that I was out there, but after the fact, like thinking about it now, all the way rewinding to the point when it happened, I think it was Bigfoot, and I think there was 2 of them. My mother will tell you she thinks it was a Bigfoot, and she thinks there was 2 of them. My grandfather will tell you he thinks it was the Mogollon monster, and there was 1 of them in his instance. But I just find it strikingly odd, and being in this line of work, how much is coincidental at the end of the day? Now, I'm not saying that, and let me refocus what I just said to say that I look at all of these things through a strict two lenses. 1, they have to pass the biblical lens, and number 2, they have to pass the logic test. And if they fail either of those, I'm sorry, like I'm going to have a hard time understanding it. So it passes the logic test with me because I'm not entirely convinced that mankind knows everything there is to know about the world around us. And I don't think anybody would be foolish enough to say we do. When I say that I don't think it's a coincidence, I don't mean that there's, some Bigfoot family following us. I think that it's interesting that it's happened to 3 different people. Maybe there's some spiritual reason behind it that I don't understand. Maybe they have nothing to do with spirituality, and it is just a coincidence, but probably not, right? You've been in this line of work, man. Come on. But those are our 3 stories that happened to my direct family members. I talked to all 3 of them very recently before I came on this, and they were happy and they were happy to hear that their stories would live on much longer than they will. They were happy to share it with you, and they were happy to share it with the rest of the world. And just to say that we're not the only ones, and we're not imagining this, because you don't imagine 3 different things 30 years apart to 3 different people.
Well, man, first off, I want to say I'm very honored that they were cool with you sharing that, and that you shared your encounters, because those are very personal things. And I agree with you, man. I think that there's probably something more to that story than what meets the eye. I don't know how to say that, but there's too many coincidences there, And I know I've talked to a lot of people, and generally, if somebody's seen these creatures once, the odds of them seeing it again are really, really high. And I think you're right. I think you definitely family had an encounter that night, and your mom and your grandfather too. So tell them for me that I appreciate them letting you share that on the story, and that I'm very honored to get it on here. But knowing what you know now and that history that you have with your family, how has that encounter impacted your life, man? How has that changed your life?
Well, so it has changed my life more recently than it has when it actually occurred to me. Hearing these things that have happened to different people in my family and different stories that my grandfather has actually told me, that's not his only one. Um, Hearing those things growing up and then experiencing it myself and then looking back at the whole picture, that tells me that one, there's a lot we don't know out there, and there's a lot that God put here that we don't know yet, and we probably won't ever know the whole truth too, right? But it confirms to me that the people out there who have never seen this and immediately dismiss it, uh, you know, that doesn't hurt me as much as it used to, right? Uh, when somebody dismisses my story and turns it into a joke or whatever, and I have not told many people that, like that story, not a lot of people know, but the people that I have told, I've had good receptions from, and I've had less than good receptions from, and some of the people, like that I thought I would get a good reception from, I didn't. So like it changed me in that now I know something bigger is going on behind the scenes, and looking at the whole picture, it tells me that maybe God's got more of like a continual kind of plan and sense of humor, whatever you want to call it, whichever direction that ends up going. I'm not sure. I can tell you this: I've been careful what you wish for, but I've been praying to actually physically see something in a roadside crossing where I live now. There's a reported story on one of our absolute favorite of all time information websites for encounters. I'm sure I don't have to tell you the specific one, but you know the one. That specific website reports about 2 miles down my road here, roadside crossing, roadside sighting, road crossing sighting, however the heck you say that. So I've been like praying, hey man, like, do you think I could get me one of those like safely from my vehicle where I won't be in any danger? The good Lord has yet to respond to my request, but we shall see what happens with that. Oh, another interesting thing too was I looked on that same organization site of information to where my experience occurred in South Central New Mexico, and actually, interestingly enough, found the exact same thing: a road cross sighting about 7 miles away by the way the crow flies from where I had my experience at. 7 miles away from there, somebody else, approximately maybe 3 years later after mine, reported a road sighting. So very interesting.
It's strange to me how the dots connect. Like I talk to people all over the U.S. and across the world, and there's always something from each of these stories that connect and dots that connect, and then you finding that the roadside sighting from right close to where yours is, and you never know, man. You just keep driving down that road there, and you're liable to see something because, man, they're everywhere in your area. I get reports in that area all the time, man. And so, going back to your encounter when you were a teenager, when you heard these, did you, besides just the obvious feeling of fear, but did you feel anything odd or did you smell anything at that time?
No, the answer to both is no. I felt only fear and retreat in that moment. I'm like, holy crap, that's right there. We are leaving. Like, that's it. I did not sense anything, mostly because, like, I'll tell you this, man, I was a dumb kid. I wasn't thinking about like what is my body and my senses telling me about where I'm at. I was just thinking like, oh, what's the next stupid thing we could do with our life, right? So that being said, I didn't sense anything. I didn't smell anything. The hairs on the back of my neck only stood up when I heard it actually go off right next to me. That was the only clue that I got. Now, after living my life as much as I have between now and then, part of me thinks that maybe if I was paying attention in the moment, there probably would have been something to actually feel or sense or experience other than just the noise that I heard. But I wasn't open to it, so that's why I didn't hear it or experience it. Rather, that's why I didn't see or smell or anything else.
That's a good answer, man. I think for guys especially, it takes us a long time to grow up. Especially at that age, we're just, we take forever to grow up. And, you did the right thing, though. I mean, you get out of there because these things are extremely, in my opinion, extremely territorial. And they probably just wanted you out of their territory. I mean, that's probably what that was about. And I think that if you have an encounter with one, there's always another one really close by. So I think you're right. There were probably two of them. To me, it's really strange that you had two, your mom had to, kind of the same stuff. And going back to that, I think there's probably more to that. What that is, man, I don't know. And then, I'm like I look at these things through a very biblical lens, and it's got to fit inside that box, man. And I think these things are more than flesh and blood. And, this is a great time to ask you that question. I love to hear everybody's thoughts, man. But what do you think these things are?
Well, honestly, I believe they're flesh and blood. And let me just explain a little bit, okay? Um, you did not get here on this earth without going through the hands of creation of God Himself. And God was pretty specific on, the things of this world, other than the respect that we give to them, they are of this world. So I believe that the things that are here, with the exception of a lot of other things, I mean, we can cut that apart as much as you want, but specifically when it comes to Bigfoot, I believe that they're flesh and blood because, just look back at the discovery of the gorilla, look back at the discovery of the orangutan, that didn't happen all that long ago. Look back over this last year. In this last year of 2024 that's just passed, we've discovered 4 large mammalians that are alive on planet Earth that were unknown to science before 2024. So, I'm not going to dive too much into the discovery of the gorilla and the orangutan, but just people said they were there all along, and then everybody else said, no, you're crazy, they're not there, like that's really weird, you're just imagining it, or you're on drugs. And then boom, guess what, only a few years later somebody actually brings back like a specimen, like, look, they are real, they're a real thing. And maybe there's some sort of bottleneck of information that occurs when it comes to, in my opinion, the forestry divisions, who probably know a hell of a lot more about this than they will ever tell anybody. And, some government organization that's buried underneath miles of paperwork, they probably know a lot more about it. And for one reason or another, are unwilling to come out and just say, yeah, they're really out there and you're not crazy and you're not imagining and you're not on drugs. So it's for that specific reason that I think they're exclusively flesh and blood. Now, my own family members will disagree with me on parts of what I just said, and that's fine, because I think it behooves of all of us to respect the world that we live in, respect the things that we were given while we are here on this world, and to treat them with the respect that they're due. And in doing so, you will have some form of a spiritual connection to the world around you. And guess what? That's exactly what God told you to do. He didn't just say you have dominion over this world. He said, man, come on, respect what I gave you. Don't just, right? Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not a hippie or nothing like that, but I'm just saying, like, if you pay attention, you will see. If you do not pay attention, like me, when I had my experience, there will be nothing to see. So I hope that makes some kind of sense to you. I know you may agree or disagree, but that's just the conclusion that I've specifically come to.
That's a solid answer. And I love to hear everybody's thoughts and opinions on these things because, at this point, we're really all taking educated guesses. And I think we're doing the best we have with the information that we have. And I agree with a lot of the points that you made. I think that, the government definitely knows about it. It's probably covered over a bunch of paperwork, and there's a bottleneck for sure. And for whatever reason, they don't want people knowing, whether it's the Forestry Service or whatever that is. And there's a bunch of rabbit holes you could go down with that. But man, what would you say to somebody that spends a lot of time out in the woods and that maybe is on the fence with this stuff, or, that maybe has an encounter that they want to talk about, but they're just kind of afraid to come forward with that, man, what would you say to them?
Well, I would tell people you're not going to always get the best reception if you do come forward and say that you saw what you saw. But I mean, some people wait decades to actually say it. And when you do say what you experienced, it can be pretty liberating. And further, if you just do the smallest bit of research into maybe your family or just your area in general, you may be surprised what you actually find about, that could point you in the direction of like either one, maybe I'm not crazy, or two, like look at all this other evidence, like I find that kind of profound and insightful. If you're on the fence about it, it feels good to talk about it. And like we're blessed to have people as good as Josh over here and as good as Daniel, that have made this platform where everyday people like me can come on and be like, yo, I saw this really weird thing once. It was strange. This is what I think it was. And, in like an area where you're not going to get ridiculed and laughed at like a lot of other people out there will. And I do find it interesting to note that the same people that will ridicule you and laugh at you and tell you, oh, you're crazy, you didn't see what you saw, the same people will blindly believe in any scientific thing that's told to them without asking a single question about it at all. I think that that's insightful in and of itself, in that you choose what you want to believe in, so you can either believe your lying eyes or you can believe what somebody's just telling you is true. So like you make up your own mind on that, man. That's what I got to say. And further than that, if you're going to go out into the forest, you're going to go out into the woods, be prepared, come prepared, learn to use a weapon and arm yourself and always keep it with you. Know the people that you go out with and tell somebody where you're going. And just a little bit further on that, don't be surprised if you find what you're looking for. Be prepared for the possibility of what you might find or experience while you're there.
Really good, solid advice, and I appreciate the kind words. Me and Daniel, we're really honored to be able to facilitate these stories and just give people a safe platform to do that. And I wonder all the time how many people are sitting on the stories and just aren't brave enough to come forward to talk about it. So thanks for giving that advice, and then hopefully that'll help somebody to come forward, man. But before we jump off here, I just want to say, Marcus, thank you for coming on the show. But man, thanks for your service, for what you do for our country. I've got the most tremendous respect for law enforcement. I've been in your boots, been in your shoes, and just know that you got a lot of people praying for you, man, and that do appreciate everything you do every single day for this country. So thanks for your service, man.
Appreciate your support, brother.
You got it. You can always count on it, man. Guys, thanks for hanging out with me and Marcus tonight. I hope you guys really enjoyed it. It's such a strange world that we live in, but I love to hear these encounters, and I appreciate people taking the time out of the day to come on here and just share their experiences, and their families' experiences. I'm very honored to be able to get these stories out there for you guys to listen to. So if you enjoy these stories, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. And if you have an encounter you would like to send me, please send it to me by email at mysteriesunknownpodcast@gmail.com. I'm going to say it, guys. Stay prayed up. We'll see you in the next episode.